A Tyrannosaurus standing thousands of kilometers from the asteroid crater would not have been vaporized by the impact. It might have survived the first day. It might even have survived the first month. But the asteroid did not need to strike every dinosaur. It only needed to shut down the system feeding them. That is the key to understanding how impact winter killed the non-avian dinosaurs. The collision was the trigger, but for animals far from the blast, darkness, cold, and starvation became the real disaster. The event happened about 66 million years ago, when an asteroid roughly 10 to 15 kilometers wide struck the shallow sea covering what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The collision excavated the Chicxulub crater, an impact structure roughly 200 kilometers across. Close to the impact, the destruction was immediate. The ground shook with extraordinary force. Tsunamis swept across nearby coastlines. Rock was melted, shattered, and thrown high above the atmosphere. But even this devastation was not enough to explain a mass extinction across the entire planet. Dinosaurs lived on distant continents. Ocean ecosystems collapsed far from Mexico. Something had to carry the catastrophe around the world. That something was the atmosphere. Chicxulub struck rocks rich in carbonates and sulfur-bearing minerals. The impact blasted enormous quantities of pulverized rock, vaporized material, and gases into the sky. The expanding plume also contained soot produced from organic-rich rocks and fires, although the scale of global burning remains debated. The largest fragments followed short paths and quickly fell back to Earth. Fine particles were different. Microscopic silicate dust, soot, and sulfur compounds could spread through the upper atmosphere, where rain could not easily wash them out. Within hours, impact material was circulating around the planet. These particles attacked the climate in different ways. Bright sulfate aerosols reflected sunlight back into space. Dark soot absorbed light high in the atmosphere. Fine mineral dust scattered and blocked incoming radiation. Scientists still debate exactly how much each ingredient contributed, especially sulfur, but together they created the conditions for an impact winter. This was not necessarily a perfectly black night covering every location for years. The exact brightness, temperature drop, and duration varied between climate models. Yet the central result is remarkably consistent. Far less sunlight reached Earth's surface, and the reduction was severe enough to cripple photosynthesis. Some recent simulations suggest fine dust alone could have remained in the atmosphere for many years, lowered global average surface temperature by as much as roughly 15 degrees Celsius, and nearly shut down photosynthesis for almost 2 years. Other estimates produce different numbers, but even a shorter and milder disruption would have been devastating. Plants do not simply use sunlight for warmth. They use its energy to combine water and carbon dioxide into sugars. Those sugars become leaves, wood, roots, fruit, and seeds. They are stored chemical energy, and nearly every large land animal ultimately depends on them. Reduce sunlight slightly, and plants grow more slowly. Reduce it drastically, and many plants stop producing enough energy to maintain themselves. New growth fails. Leaves fall. Seedlings die. Entire plant communities begin to break apart. The fossil record captures this disruption. In several regions, pollen from established Cretaceous forests drops sharply near the extinction boundary. Fern spores suddenly become much more common. Ferns are effective colonizers of damaged ground. So this so-called fern spike is evidence of landscapes recovering after severe ecological disturbance. That does not mean every tree on Earth died. Seeds, roots, and dormant plant tissues could survive in protected places. Some vegetation endured, and recovery varied by region. Impact winter did not sterilize the continents. It did something more selective. It removed much of the fresh plant growth that large food webs required. Picture a herd of Edmontosaurus moving across western North America. Before the impact, the animals could browse through productive forests and wetlands. Afterward, the same landscape might offer dead leaves, damaged trunks, buried roots, and patches of surviving vegetation. That sounds like food, but it is not enough to maintain a population of multi-ton herbivores for long. Large bodies contain useful energy reserves, yet they also require enormous and repeated inputs of food. A giant herbivore cannot hide inside a burrow. It cannot live on a handful of seeds. It must keep finding vegetation while competing with every other hungry plant eater in the area. The first individuals may have survived by stripping bark, eating fallen material, or locating isolated pockets of living plants. But every day without normal growth reduced the available supply. Malnutrition weakened adults. Reproduction became harder. Juveniles faced even worse odds. Then the collapse climbed one level higher. Carnivorous dinosaurs were not protected because they ate meat. At first, predators and scavengers may have encountered an abundance of carcasses. That was a temporary windfall. Once herbivore populations crashed, the living prey base disappeared with them. A Tyrannosaurus could survive one missed hunt. It could not survive indefinitely in a landscape that no longer produced enough herbivores. The impact winter was not just a famine for individuals. It was the failure of the biological machinery that continually replaced their food. This also explains why the extinction cannot be reduced to one simple rule, such as large animals died and small animals survived. Some small non-avian dinosaurs existed near the end of the Cretaceous, and they disappeared too. Meanwhile, some crocodilians, turtles, mammals, amphibians, lizards, and birds crossed the boundary. Survival probably depended on combinations of traits rather than one magical adaptation. Small animals needed less total food. Generalists could switch between seeds, insects, carrion, and other resources. Burrowers could shelter from cold and surface destruction. Animals capable of lowering their metabolism or enduring long periods without feeding gained another advantage. Even then, survival was brutal. Many mammal and bird lineages vanished. Crocodilians suffered losses. The groups that reached the Paleogene were remnants, not untouched winners. Birds make the dinosaur story especially important. Birds are living dinosaurs, so the asteroid did not eliminate Dinosauria completely. It killed every known non-avian dinosaur lineage, while a limited number of avian lineages survived. Seed eating may have helped some of those survivors. Seeds can remain edible after leaves and fruit have disappeared, acting like compact packets of stored energy. Ground-dwelling habits may also have been useful after forests were damaged. But these ideas are supported mainly through anatomy, evolutionary relationships, and extinction patterns. We cannot assign one survival strategy to every bird that crossed the boundary. Freshwater ecosystems offer another clue. Rivers, ponds, and wetlands often contain food webs supported partly by detritus. That means dead leaves, decaying wood, carcasses, and other organic material already produced before the sunlight crisis. Microbes and small invertebrates can feed on that material. Fish and amphibians can feed on them. Turtles and crocodilians can then feed higher in the chain. This system still suffers when photosynthesis declines, but its stored reservoir of dead matter may keep functioning longer than a food web dependent on constant new plant growth. Crocodilians also have relatively low energy demands compared with similarly sized warm-blooded animals. Many can go long periods between meals. Their survival was not guaranteed, but freshwater shelter, detritus-based food webs, and low metabolism gave some lineages a buffer that large terrestrial dinosaurs lacked. The oceans experienced their own version of the same collapse. At the surface, microscopic phytoplankton captured sunlight and formed the base of marine food webs. When light levels fell, primary productivity crashed. Zooplankton lost their food, followed by larger animals that depended on them. Ammonites disappeared, along with many plankton groups and the large marine reptiles. Those reptiles were not dinosaurs, but they were victims of the same planetary disruption. Organisms living near the seafloor, where feeding on sinking or buried organic matter was already common, often survived better than animals tied directly to surface production. Cold intensified all of these pressures. With less solar energy reaching the ground and ocean surface, temperatures dropped rapidly. Continental interiors cooled faster than the seas. Growing seasons changed or vanished. Even where enough light remained for limited photosynthesis, low temperatures could slow growth and reduce the amount of food ecosystems produced. Eventually, dust settled, aerosols disappeared, sunlight returned, and photosynthesis resumed. But a food web is not a light switch. A surviving patch of vegetation cannot immediately support herds of giant herbivores. A bloom of plankton does not instantly rebuild every link in an ocean ecosystem. Once non-avian dinosaur populations fell below recoverable levels, clearer skies came too late. Their habitats had changed, their food webs had been simplified, and the surviving animals were already occupying the remaining ecological pathways. We reconstruct this sequence from several independent clues. There is the worldwide boundary layer enriched in iridium. There are shocked minerals and glassy impact particles. There is the buried Chicxulub crater. There are abrupt changes in pollen, spores, marine microfossils, and vertebrate communities. Climate models then test whether the material launched by the impact could produce the darkness and cooling needed to match those extinction patterns. Deccan volcanism in India was also changing the late Cretaceous environment, and it may have stressed ecosystems before and after the collision. But the timing of Chicxulub, the global impact layer, and the sudden biological turnover identify the asteroid as the principal trigger of the mass extinction. The famous fireball lasted minutes. The most violent local destruction lasted hours or days. The atmospheric and ecological consequences lasted far longer. That is why the final image of the non-avian dinosaurs should not be a single animal swallowed by an explosion. It should be a living Tyrannosaurus beneath a dim sky, walking through a food web that has stopped rebuilding itself. The asteroid made the crater. Impact winter made a world that could no longer feed the dinosaurs.